Imagine this. You're on a train and it's headed straight towards 5 people tied up on the track. But if you pull a lever that's next to you, it takes you to another track where one person is tied up. What would you do? Would you pull the lever or would you let it go straight towards the 5 people?
That's a very interesting question. And I'd be even more interested to see what like an AI model like ChatGPT would do to answer this. And if you were on that train, would you trust an AI model to make that decision for you?
Yes, well, as you can see, ChatGPT decided to pull the lever in order to save the 5 people. But it's all about how one day we might trust AI to make these kind of decisions for us. Think about autonomous cars or even an AI government. They might need to decide in an instant between two terrible options, much like the trolley situation. But this is where AI ethics comes into play.
Well, I think the thing to think about here is how do we even know what the right decision is? And then what is going to be the process for these AI models to come up with the quote unquote right decision?
So in order to understand how these AI models get to the right answer, we have to understand how large language models get their information. This is crucial to how they make decisions and what leads to their responses.
Right. And so the data for these models comes from a variety of different sources. So in the case of OpenAI, for example, they use a free open source tool called Common Scrape to scrape the internet for historical records, books, magazines, anything that's written in text online that can be digitized and analyzed.
So models like GPT-4 and a bunch of other large language models get tons and tons of information from these web scrapes. But like we know, there's a bunch of information on the web that is either not accurate or dangerous or just shouldn't be exactly shown to the public. So there are people that have jobs called labelers, and these labelers go through the data. They can label this data as either safe or not safe or whatever they're specifically instructed to do. This also follows the process of RLHF.
Yeah, and RLHF is reinforcement learning with human feedback. And what this does is while the model is being developed, instead of just using, rewards, predefined rewards from the internal environment, it uses human feedback to align the model closer to humans' morals and goals. And this is the job of the labelers. And who are these labelers? So in 2020, it was reported that OpenAI, for example, used Kenyan workers and paid them $1.32 to $2 an hour and gave them terrible working conditions looking at this unfiltered data. And some of them had actual psychological trauma due to this working conditions.
OpenAI is not the only company to do this. It's actually pretty common among the big tech companies. And they do this because it's so financially beneficial for them. But the whole point behind using the labelers and going through RLHF is to ensure that the ethical standard is as high as possible. When using these conditions, you really have to question the accuracy and the diversity of the results. You're putting these Kenyans in horrible conditions with only one set of people, and now you're expecting accurate and diverse results. And that just really raises the question of if it actually is.
Correct. And it also raises the question, can we even trust these models to begin with? But moving past all of these concerns, there's still more for us to look at as regards to the process of these AIs deciding what is right and wrong.
Correct. So now that we understand how AI models get their information, we can now start with the first step of the decision process, and that is feature extraction. So as we go along this process, we're going to use an example. So picture the AI model being the one that Tesla uses to drive autonomously. In this example, imagine being in a Tesla, and you're driving down a state road at about 45 miles an hour when a pedestrian walks across the street. You're just about 30 feet away from them, and there's traffic to the left, right, and behind you as well. Unfortunately, you were consumed in a conversation, so you don't notice the pedestrian. Now the decision is up to AI to decide everyone's fate.
Yeah, so this is obviously a very high stakes situation, but these AI models are trained to minimize risk and maximize safety. So like we said, that first step is feature extraction. So here the Tesla cars, sensors and cameras are continuously scanning the environment. They detect not just the pedestrian on the sidewalk, but also the proximity and speed of all the nearby vehicles. It's a full 360-degree capture of every possible detail in real time.
The next step is situation assessment, and with this step, the AI evaluates all the different situations that it could undergo. So it decides whether it should swerve, it should slam on the brakes, or even maintain the same speed. But with this, it has to make sure that it's making the best decision to minimize as much damage as possible.
And I think the interesting thing to look in addition to this is that AI models don't have emotions. So when a human goes into a decision, its emotions play a massive role. It's almost 50-50 to logic. Whereas with the AI in this particular case, the passenger, the drivers on the other side, as well as the passengers in the Tesla, their lives are equal and there's no emotions at play.
Exactly. And this shows us how prepared these models are to deal with these high intensity situations, whether it's the trolley situation or the one in the Tesla right now. The labelers and the RLHF is what makes these models so sufficient at something like this.
The next step is the ethical reasoning step. So this is where the underlying model behind the Tesla analyzes various different factors. So how hard they should swerve, how hard they should press on the brakes to try and save the passenger, to try and minimize damage to the vehicle in front of the Tesla. Because according to the training, the whole goal of the Tesla model is to maximize well-being and safety.
Correct. And here, the Tesla decides to hit the brakes. And it's already done all the calculations of how hard to hit the brakes to make sure that everybody involved is affected to the minimal amount.
So this is obviously not an easy decision to make. So every single human would have a very difficult time making a decision in that sort of time frame, and they'd have to rely upon their instincts. Whereas the AI model was able to analyze various different factors to make the best possible decision that maximizes, both well-being of all the humans and ethical concerns.
Now we're on to our last step, which is action execution, which is where the Tesla actually hits the brakes. And it makes sure that it does hit the brakes with all those calculations and minimizes any damage that could possibly be done.
And from this example, we can see that these AI models have reached a point where they are able to make ethical decisions to some degree.
We do live in a pretty incredible world that these AI models are making massive ethical decisions. But the one drawback is the fact that these decisions are made primarily off the data that it's been fed. So if this data that it's being given is biased, it kind of throws off the whole idea of making an ethical decision.
Yeah, and another thing to note is that we also live in a very diverse world. And this means that we have very different views of moral code and ethics. And so when creating these models, we need to make sure that we use a proper balance of everybody's different moral codes and ethics.
With this, we want to hear what you guys are thinking about these scenarios. Do you think the world is a safer place letting these AI models make decisions? Or are we better off letting humans maintain the control?
Thank you guys so much for being here for part of our learning journey, and we hope that we're being a part of your learning journey with these topics as well. Please subscribe so that you can follow along for future videos, related to this one and various other topics about new technologies.
In this week's video, we talked a lot about whether or not we can trust these AI models. But be sure to check out the last week's video. We talked about whether or not we could trust ChatGPT versus Google. It'll actually be right below Connell. So yeah, show them where it's at. And then Connell, I got one last question for you.
Okay, what's that question?
Yeah, what's 1 plus 1 is?
Probably deuces.